The coat room smelled like wool and wine, and secrets nobody bothered to keep, and Juliet Porter was bent over a torn veil with pins between her teeth when she realized someone else was breathing in the dark. Her fingers froze mid-stitch. The fabric bunched in her lap, yards of imported silk that cost more than her rent, and she thought wildly that if she'd ruined it by startling, she would throw herself into the vineyard fountain and simply drown. The wedding started in 17 minutes. The bride, her cousin Margot, golden and beloved and utterly incapable of checking whether her dramatic cathedral veil could fit through a standard doorframe, was probably hysterical by now. Juliet had slipped away the moment Margot's shriek of horror had split the bridal suite, snatched the torn length of silk, and fled before anyone could add this disaster to the invisible tally of things Juliet Porter fixed without thanks. She'd thought the coat room would be empty. It was not. "You sew very quietly," said a voice from near the door, low and faintly accented, the kind of voice that made you think of winter and old stone and things that didn't need to raise their volume to be obeyed. "I barely heard you come in." Juliet's heart launched itself at her ribs. She turned slowly, the veil sliding through her hands, and found a man watching her from beside a rack of overcoats. No, not a man. She'd lived 26 years as the family invisible, the cousin who hemmed everyone's graduation gowns and bridesmaid dresses and never got properly introduced at reunions. But she knew danger when it stood in front of her wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. He was tall and still in the way predators are still before they move. His hair was so pale it looked silver in the weak light from the single dusty bulb overhead, pulled back from a face that might have been carved from marble if marble could look annoyed. His skin was bloodless white, the kind of white that didn't come from avoiding the sun but from never having needed it. And his eyes pale gray, almost colorless, fixed on her with the sort of attention that made her stomach drop. "I'm sorry," Juliet blurted, which was her default setting when caught anywhere she shouldn't be, even though she had explicit permission to be here because she was fixing Margot's veil and saving the entire wedding. "I didn't know anyone was... It's an emergency. The bride's veil tore. I'm almost done." "Stay," he said. And it wasn't a suggestion. Juliet stayed, mostly because her legs had stopped receiving signals from her brain, but also because he'd moved between her and the door without seeming to move at all, and that was the kind of thing that made a person reconsider their options. She swallowed. Are you a guest?" "Of a sort." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with unnerving focus. "You're muttering." "I mutter when I sew," Juliet said, defensive. "It helps me concentrate." "You were telling the fabric it was being difficult." Heat flooded her face. She had been. She always did. Thread and cloth made sense to her in ways people never had, and she'd long since stopped being embarrassed about carrying on one-sided conversations with her work, except she was extremely embarrassed about it now, in front of this stranger who looked like he'd stepped out of a painting titled The Reckoning, or possibly Death Takes a Holiday. "It was being difficult," she muttered, hunching back over the veil. If she ignored him, maybe he'd leave. That was how she handled most awkward social encounters. Become small, become invisible, wait for someone more interesting to pull focus. It had worked for 26 years. It did not work now. "May I watch?" he asked, and the question was so unexpected that Juliet glanced up. "Watch me sew? Yes? That's why?" "I find it soothing," he said, which was possibly the strangest thing anyone had ever said to her, and she once had a customer tell her he found it soothing to alphabetize his spice rack by Latin name. "I okay?" Juliet fumbled with her needle, acutely aware now of his gaze on her hands. Her fingers felt clumsy and too large. She jabbed the needle through the silk, drew the thread taut, tried to find the rhythm she'd had before he'd materialized, like some kind of funeral director's wet dream. The tear was along the hem, a long split where Margot had caught the veil on a door handle in her excitement. Juliet worked in tiny, invisible stitches, the kind she'd learned from her grandmother before the dementia took her ability to remember Juliet's name. The kind nobody noticed, which was fine, because nobody noticed Juliet either. "You're skilled," the man said after a moment. "I'm a seamstress." She didn't look up. "It's my job." "Is that your profession or your identity?" Juliet's hands stilled. She had no idea how to answer that. The two had blurred together years ago, probably around the time she'd started declining invitations because she had rush orders, or skipping family dinners because someone needed alterations overnight, or simply stopped being invited places because people forgot she existed when she wasn't fixing their hems. "Both, I guess," she said quietly, and went back to her stitching. He was silent for a while. She could feel him there, a presence that pressed against her awareness like weight. The coat room was small and cluttered, lined with racks of guest jackets and coats, smelling of perfume and cigarette smoke smuggled in pockets. Beyond the door, she could hear the rising chaos of wedding preparation voices calling for the bride, someone testing the microphone, the string quartet warming up with discordant scales. 17 minutes had become 12, probably, maybe 10. Her fingers flew faster. "You're afraid," he said. "I'm on a deadline." "No. You're afraid they'll blame you if it isn't perfect." Juliet's jaw tightened. "It will be perfect. And they still won't thank you." Her needle slipped. She barely caught herself before she stabbed her own thumb. "You don't know that, don't I?" She did look up then, pins still caught between her lips, and found him watching her with something that might have been recognition, like he knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible. Which was absurd, because he was the most visible person she'd ever encountered, commanding and strange and magnetic in a way that made the air feel heavier just from proximity. "Who are you?" Juliet asked around the pins. "Wren Blackthorne," he said, and offered the name like he was offering a blade, something sharp and formal and potentially dangerous. The name tickled something in her memory. Blackthorne. Where had she— "Oh God," Juliet breathed. "You're the Margot said the investor who owns the vineyard was coming. She was terrified about impressing you. You're funding this spectacle, yes. She'll kill me if she finds out I'm hiding in here talking to you instead of— You're not talking to me. You're saving her wedding." His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "I won't tell if you don't." Juliet stared at him, then back at the veil, then at him again. "Why are you in the coat room?" "Too many people in the garden." "It's a wedding." "Precisely." Despite everything, the deadline, the panic, the strangeness of this entire encounter, Juliet felt a laugh bubble up. She swallowed it quickly, but not before she saw his expression shift, something warming in those cold eyes. "Do you hate weddings then?" she asked, turning back to her work. She was almost done. 3 more inches of torn hem, 2 minutes of work if her hands stayed steady. "I'm ambivalent about the institution," Wren said. "The theatrics exhaust me." "Then why come?" "Obligation." He said it like a curse. Juliet understood obligation. Obligation was hemming Margot's dress for free because family didn't charge family, even though Margot never hemmed anything for Juliet, mostly because Juliet never asked and Margot never offered. Obligation was smiling through another rehearsal dinner where she wasn't introduced, another reception where she sat at the table near the kitchen, another family photo where someone realized too late she'd been cropped out. "Well," she said, tying off the final stitch with hands that had steadied now that the end was in sight. "Your obligation is about to walk down the aisle in a perfect veil, so you're welcome. I had nothing to do with that. You let me work without interruption. That's something." Juliet bit through the thread, tucked her needle into the small sewing kit she'd shoved in her clutch, and held up the veil. The repair was invisible. Margot would never know how close she'd come to disaster. Nobody would. Juliet was very good at invisible. "Remarkable," Wren said, and he sounded like he meant it. "It's just sewing." "No," he said quietly. "It's not." Juliet met his eyes and forgot for a moment how to breathe. He was looking at her like she was something worth looking at, like she wasn't the background cousin in the dove-gray dress who'd spent the rehearsal dinner refilling water glasses because it gave her something to do with her hands, like she was the door banged open. "Juliet!" Margot's maid of honor, a whippet-thin woman named Claire, stood framed in the doorway, her face flushed. "What are you? We've been looking everywhere. Margot's losing her mind. She thinks you ran off with her veil to— Oh." Claire's eyes landed on Wren and went very round. "Mr. Blackthorne, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were— I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't interrupt," Wren said smoothly. "Miss Porter was just finishing." Juliet scrambled to her feet, clutching the veil. "It's done. Tell Margot it's perfect. She can—" Claire snatched the veil from her hands and disappeared without a thank you, her heels clattering on the hardwood. Juliet stood in the sudden silence, her empty hands curling into fists at her sides. Of course there was no thank you. There never was. Every time? Wren asked. What? Do they always take without thanking? Juliet's throat felt tight. It's fine. It's not. It's how it is. She grabbed her clutch, checked automatically that she hadn't left pins scattered on the floor. She never did, and headed for the door. Wren didn't move. She had to stop a foot away from him, trapped between his body and the coat rack, close enough to realize he was taller than she'd thought, and cold, like standing near an open freezer. "Excuse me," she said, eyes on the floor. He stepped aside. "Will you be at the reception?" "I'm a bridesmaid. I have to be." "Good." Juliet risked a glance up. "Why?" But he didn't answer, just held the door open with old-fashioned courtesy that made her feel unsteady, and she fled into the noise and light and chaos of the wedding that was about to start. She didn't see him during the ceremony. She stood at the front of the vineyard chapel in her dove-gray dress, holding a bouquet of white roses that made her hands itch, and watched Margot float down the aisle in perfect silk and a perfect veil that nobody knew had been torn 20 minutes before. The groom cried. Margot cried. The officiant made a joke about love and wine, and everyone laughed. Juliet's feet hurt. She'd worn heels that were half a size too small because they matched the dress, and she focused on that pain instead of the familiar ache of being part of a moment, but not really part of it, present but unseen, necessary but unnoticed. When the bride and groom kissed, everyone cheered. Juliet clapped along with them and felt nothing at all. The reception was held in the vineyard's main hall, a converted barn with exposed beams and string lights that turned everything golden. Juliet's assigned seat was at table 12, tucked near the kitchen doors, surrounded by distant cousins she'd met twice, and college friends of the groom who spent dinner talking across her about cryptocurrency. She ate prime rib that tasted like paper and drank wine that was probably expensive, smiled when expected, laughed when required, and counted down the hours until she could reasonably leave without being asked why she left early. She was planning her escape when the band started playing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead singer announced, his voice booming over the speaker system, "please welcome Mr. and Mrs. Chen to the floor for their first dance." The crowd applauded. Margot and her new husband David, a stockbroker with good teeth and a better portfolio, swept onto the dance floor. The band launched into something slow and romantic, probably Ed Sheeran, possibly John Legend, definitely expensive. Juliet watched from her chair and wished she could disappear into the kitchen. "And now," the singer continued as the song ended, "we invite all our couples to join the newlyweds on the floor." Oh no. Chairs scraped back. People rose in pairs, laughing and eager. The cryptocurrency bros at Juliet's table scattered to find their girlfriends. The distant cousins fled. In 30 seconds, Juliet was alone at a table meant for 10, surrounded by empty chairs and abandoned napkins, an island of solitude in a sea of paired-off happiness. She should leave. She should absolutely leave. Nobody would miss her. Nobody would even notice she'd gone. But then Margot's Aunt Helen was leaning over her shoulder, perfume thick as smoke, voice loud enough to carry 3 tables over. "Juliet, sweetheart, don't just sit there. Go dance. There are plenty of single men here. I'm sure one of them—" "I'm fine, Aunt Helen." "Nonsense, you're young. You should be out there having fun. What about Margot's co-worker, the tall one with the—" "I said I'm fine." But Aunt Helen was already waving someone over, and Juliet felt panic climb her spine because she knew what was coming. She was about to be volunteered onto the dance floor, forced into the spotlight, made to sway awkwardly in some stranger's arms while everyone watched, and she turned the color of a fire engine, because she always did. Because her pale skin had never learned subtlety, and every scrap of embarrassment or emotion painted itself across her face for the world to see. They'd mocked her for it in school. Juliet Porter, the girl who blushed at everything, the human mood ring, the tomato. She was standing before she realized she'd moved, muttering excuses, pushing away from the table. Aunt Helen called after her, but Juliet was already walking, fast, threading between tables toward the back of the hall. She didn't know where she was going. The bathroom. Outside. Anywhere but here. Anywhere she wouldn't be seen. A hand caught her wrist. Juliet gasped and spun and found Wren Blackthorne standing in the shadows near the hallway, still dressed in black, still pale as death, looking at her like he'd been waiting. "You're running," he said. I need air." "You need cover." His eyes flicked past her to the dance floor, then back to her face. "They were going to force you out there." "It's fine. You keep saying that." "Because it is." But her voice shook and she knew he heard it. His grip on her wrist was cool and firm and oddly steadying. "Come with me." "What?" "Now." He didn't wait for her answer, just turned and walked down the hallway toward the back of the building, and Juliet, because she was already fleeing, because he was the only person who'd actually seen her all day, because she didn't know what else to do, followed. He led her past the bathrooms, past a storage closet, all the way to the coat room at the end of the hall, the same coat room from before. The door clicked shut behind them, and the noise of the reception dropped to a muffled rumble, the band's music filtering through the walls like a distant dream. Juliet pressed her back against the door, breathing hard. "Why did you dance with me?" Wren said. She blinked. "What? You didn't want to dance out there. Dance here instead." He held out one hand, palm up, formal as a portrait. "Where no one will see you blush." The words hit her like cold water. She stared at him, this strange, pale man in his perfect black suit, and something painful twisted in her chest because he'd understood. Somehow, impossibly, he'd understood. I'm not a good dancer," she said weakly. "Neither am I." "That's a lie. You look like you waltzed out of the 18th century. His mouth twitched. 17th, actually," Juliet's brain stuttered. "What?" "Dance with me, Juliet Porter." He said her name like he was tasting it, careful and deliberate. "Just here, just us, no one watching." The music swelled beyond the wall, something slow and sweet. Her heart was doing complicated things in her chest. This was absurd. This was possibly the strangest thing that had ever happened to her. And she'd once had a customer ask her to embroider his cat's face onto a denim jacket. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, cool and steady, and he drew her into the center of the small room with surprising gentleness. His other hand settled at her waist, and she realized she was supposed to put her hand on his shoulder, which meant touching him, which meant standing very close in a coat room surrounded by wool and wine smell and the faint sound of someone else's first dance. "I'll step on your feet," Juliet warned. "I'll survive." She placed her hand on his shoulder. The fabric of his suit was expensive beneath her palm, and beneath that she felt nothing, no warmth, no heartbeat, just cold, solid muscle. He began to move, a simple box step, leading her in slow circles between the coat racks. Juliet tried to follow. She counted the steps in her head, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, focused on not tripping over her two small heels. But Wren was patient, his movements deliberate and easy to track, and after a minute she stopped counting and just moved with him. "There," he said quietly. "Not so terrible. You're a better teacher than my high school gym instructor." "I've had more practice." "How much more?" He met her eyes and she saw something flicker there, old and amused and sad. "More than you'd believe." They turned in a slow circle. The music beyond the wall shifted, one song bleeding into another. Juliet should have felt ridiculous, waltzing in a coat room with a stranger while a wedding reception carried on without her. Instead, she felt safe, seen. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Doing what?" "Being kind to me. You don't know me. I know you fixed a veil in 12 minutes under deadline. I know you speak to fabric like it's alive. I know you run when people try to pull you into the light." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I know what it's like to be good at being invisible." "You're not invisible." "No, I'm avoided. It's different, but the result is the same." Juliet studied his face, sharp angles, and pale skin, and eyes like winter fog. "Why are you avoided?" "Because people sense what I am." "What are you?" He was quiet for a long moment, still leading her in gentle circles. Then he said, very softly, "Do you really want to know?" Something in his voice made her shiver. But she'd asked, and she hated when people asked questions they didn't want answered. So she nodded. "I'm very old," Wren said. "I'm very dangerous. And I've been called many things over the centuries, but the one that's most accurate is this: I'm a vampire, Juliet Porter. And I'm a king." Juliet missed a step. She stumbled into him and his arm came around her, catching her easily, holding her steady. She should have pulled away. She should have run, but she was pressed against his chest, cold, so cold, and when she tilted her head back to look up at him, she saw truth in his eyes, ancient and inescapable. "You're serious," she whispered. "Yes." "Vampires are real." "Yes. And you're their king. One of them. There are several lines, several territories. I rule the North American covens." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was telling her he managed a chain of hotels. Juliet's thoughts spun. Vampires. King. Centuries. It should have been impossible. It should have been insane. But she thought of his white skin and white hair, his unnatural stillness, the way he'd moved between her and the door without seeming to move at all. She thought of how cold his hands were, how he'd stood in shadows, how people in the reception hall had given him space without seeming to realize they were doing it. "You're telling me this why?" she managed. "Because you asked, and because you deserve honesty." He still held her, one arm around her waist, the other hand cradling hers. "And because I won't dance with you under false pretenses. We're dancing in a coat room. We're dancing," he corrected gently, "where you feel safe enough to let yourself be held." Juliet's face went hot. She felt the blush crawl up her throat, flood her cheeks, paint her the color of humiliation, and she tried to turn away, but Wren's hand came up, his cool fingers brushing her jaw. "Don't," he said. "Don't hide. I look ridiculous. You look alive." His thumb traced her cheekbone, and his expression was so tender it made her chest ache. "Do you know how rare that is for me? To see someone so vibrant, so full of blood and warmth and feeling? You wear your heart on your skin, Juliet. It's not ridiculous. It's beautiful." Nobody had ever called her beautiful, not like this. Not while she was blushing herself into oblivion, not while she was flustered and overwhelmed and probably about to cry in a coat room with a vampire king who danced like a dream. "I don't understand," she whispered. "What don't you understand? Why you're being so why me? There are 100 people out there who are prettier, more interesting, more visible?" Wren shook his head. "I don't want visible. I've spent 300 years surrounded by people who perform for my attention. You're the first person in decades who didn't know who I was and didn't care to perform. You just existed. Beautifully, competently, kindly." His voice dropped. "You saved a wedding today and expected nothing in return. Do you know how extraordinary that is?" Juliet didn't know what to say. The music had changed beyond the wall, something faster now, but Wren kept them moving in the same slow rhythm, like they were dancing to a song only he could hear. "I should go back," she said without conviction. "Do you want to?" "No." "Then stay." So she did. They danced through 2 more songs, 3, until Juliet lost count and stopped caring. Wren told her about the vineyard he'd bought it a decade ago, staffed it with a mix of humans and vampires who needed quiet work away from court politics. He told her about the castle he kept beneath the city, tunnels that ran through old subway lines and forgotten basements, a whole world hidden under Boston's feet. He told her about vampire law, blood oaths, the ancient families who jockeyed for power and favor. He spoke carefully, watching her face, ready to stop if she showed fear. She didn't. She was fascinated. "What about sunlight?" she asked. "Painful. Not immediately fatal, but extremely unpleasant, like being burned from the inside." "Garlic?" "A myth, though I dislike the smell." "Steaks?" "Anything through the heart is fatal. That's not unique to vampires." "Blood?" "Necessary. We have donors, volunteers mostly. It's all very regulated." He paused. "I know what you're thinking." "I doubt that. You're wondering if I'll bite you." Juliet's blush returned, fierce and hot. "No." "Liar." "Fine, maybe." "I won't," Wren said firmly. "Not without permission, and not here. You're safe with me, Juliet. I promise you that." She believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. "Do you have to go back?" she asked. "To the reception?" "Eventually. I should congratulate the bride. She'll faint when she meets you." "She already fainted. During the rehearsal dinner. I had to pretend I didn't notice." Juliet laughed, surprised and genuine, and Wren's entire face transformed. He looked younger when he smiled, less marble-carved and more real, and she realized with a jolt that he was handsome. Not beautiful in the eerie, untouchable way she'd first thought, but properly, humanly handsome beneath the vampiric pallor. "I like when you laugh," he said. "I don't do it enough." "No," he agreed, "you don't." The song beyond the wall ended. Silence fell, broken only by muffled applause and the distant clink of glasses. Juliet realized they'd stopped moving, that they were standing very close together in the dim light of the coat room, his hands still on her waist and hers still on his shoulders. "I should," she started. "Juliet Porter." "Yes? May I see you again?" Her heart stopped. "What?" "After tonight. May I see you?" He spoke formally, carefully, like the words mattered. "I would like to know you better, if you're willing." "You're a vampire king." "Yes. And I'm a seamstress from Dorchester who talks to fabric." "Yes? We have nothing in common." "We both prefer shadows to spotlights," Wren said. "We both understand what it means to be unseen. And we both, if I'm not mistaken, enjoyed the last hour far more than we expected to." Juliet couldn't argue with that. "Okay," she said. His eyebrows rose. "Okay? You can see me again, if you want." "I want. But not, I mean, this isn't," she floundered. "What are you asking for, exactly?" "Dinner, conversation, time." He hesitated, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. "Courtship, if you'll allow it. I realize I'm doing this backwards. I should have asked permission before I danced with you, before I told you what I am. But you were running, and I wanted to help." "You did help." "Good." His thumb brushed her waist, a gesture so small and so deliberate it made her shiver. "Then let me continue helping. Let me take you somewhere you won't have to hide. Let me—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Let me try to be someone worth your time. You're a king. I'm a man asking a woman if she'll have dinner with him." Wren's voice was rough now, stripped of formality. "Say yes, Juliet. Please." Juliet had never been asked please before. Not like this. Not by someone who looked at her like she was the only person in the room, the world, the century. "Yes," she whispered. Wren exhaled, a sound like relief. "Thank you. But I have one condition." "Name it." "If we do this, if we try this, you have to promise me you'll tell me the truth. Always. Even if it's hard." She held his gaze. "I've spent my whole life being invisible because people don't think I'm important enough to include. I won't be invisible to you, too." "You could never be invisible to me," Wren said, and kissed her. It was soft and careful and cold, his mouth a shock against hers, and Juliet made a small sound of surprise before she melted into it. He tasted like winter and wine and something darker, something that sent electricity down her spine. His hand came up to cup her face, and she fisted her hands in his jacket and kissed him back, clumsy and eager and probably terrible at it, but he didn't seem to mind. He just held her, like she was something precious, and kissed her like he had all the time in the world. When they broke apart, Juliet was breathing hard. Wren looked composed as ever, but his eyes had gone darker, hungrier, and she felt a thrill of something that might have been fear or might have been excitement. "I should walk you back," he said roughly. "Probably. Before I forget myself." "Would that be so bad?" "Yes." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You deserve better than a stolen moment in a coat room, Juliet Porter. You deserve courtship, attention, time. I intend to give you all of it. You really are from the 17th century. Does it bother you?" "No," Juliet said honestly. "It's kind of amazing." They stayed like that for another moment, breathing together in the quiet dark. Then Wren stepped back, smoothed his suit, and offered her his arm like they were about to promenade through a garden instead of sneak back into a wedding reception where nobody had missed her. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." He led her back down the hallway. The reception was still in full swing, the dance floor crowded, the bar surrounded 3 deep with guests demanding champagne. Nobody looked their way. Nobody noticed Juliet Porter slipping back to her table, face flushed and lips kiss-swollen, or Wren Blackthorne disappearing into the shadows near the bar where people instinctively gave him space. Nobody, except Margot, who materialized at Juliet's side 10 minutes later, with her veil still perfect and her eyes bright with curiosity. "Where were you?" she demanded. "Aunt Helen said you ran off. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Juliet said, and for the first time in years she meant it. "You look flushed." "It's warm in here." Hmm. Margot didn't sound convinced, but she was already being pulled away by someone wanting a photo, and Juliet was left alone at her table with an empty wine glass and a pocket full of sewing pins and a future that felt for the first time like it might be more than invisible. Across the hall, Wren caught her eye. He raised his glass in a small private toast. Juliet smiled and raised hers back. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Juliet danced with an elderly uncle who stepped on her feet, made small talk with bridesmaids who didn't remember her name, and counted down the minutes until she could reasonably escape. Wren had disappeared shortly after their toast vampire business, she assumed, or maybe he'd just had enough of mortal celebrations. Either way, she didn't see him again before she finally slipped out at midnight, heels in her hand, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. She caught a rideshare back to her apartment in Dorchester, a cramped third-floor walk up above a nail salon that smelled perpetually of acetone. Her cat, Buttons an elderly tabby with one eye and a vendetta against closed doors, yowled at her the moment she walked in. I know, I'm late," Juliet said, dropping her heels by the door and padding to the kitchen in bare feet. She filled Buttons' bowl, changed into pajamas, and collapsed onto her couch with her phone. No new messages. She hadn't expected any. She'd given Wren her number before they'd parted in the coat room, scribbling it on the back of a receipt because she didn't have business cards, and he'd looked charmed by the informality of it. But it was late, and he was probably busy doing king things, and she was probably insane for thinking a vampire would actually call her. Her phone buzzed. Juliet nearly dropped it. The message was from an unknown number. I enjoyed our dances tonight. Sleep well, Juliet Porter. She stared at the screen, her heart doing acrobatics. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she typed back, I enjoyed them too. Thank you for the rescue. His response came immediately. The pleasure was mine. Are you free tomorrow evening? Tomorrow was Sunday. She had 3 alteration orders due Monday, a hem job for Mrs. Chen across the hall, and absolutely no plans beyond that. Yes, she sent. Good. I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something comfortable. Comfortable for what? You'll see. Trust me? Juliet hesitated, then typed, Okay. Good night, Juliet. Good night, Wren. She set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Buttons jumped onto her chest, purring like a motorboat, and Juliet scratched behind his ears while her mind raced. She'd agreed to a date with a vampire king, who'd danced with her in a coat room to keep her from being humiliated, who'd kissed her like she mattered. This was insane. This was possibly the best thing that had ever happened to her. She fell asleep on the couch with Buttons on her chest and her phone clutched in her hand, and dreamed of dancing in the dark. Wren arrived at 7 sharp the next evening, driving a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than Juliet's yearly rent. She'd agonized over what to wear comfortable could mean anything, and had finally settled on jeans, a soft sweater, and ankle boots that were actually her size. She felt underdressed the moment she slid into the passenger seat and saw him in tailored slacks and a charcoal shirt that made his pale hair look even more striking. You look lovely, he said, pulling away from the curb with the easy confidence of someone who'd been driving since before cars had seatbelts. You look like you stepped out of a magazine. I had 3 centuries to develop a sense of style. You have an excuse. Juliet laughed despite her nerves. Where are we going? Somewhere quiet. I thought we could talk without interruption. He drove them out of the city, heading north along the coast. The sun had set an hour ago, the sky still streaked with purple and gold, and Juliet watched the scenery blur past while Wren navigated with the ease of someone who'd memorized every road. They talked about small things, her work, his vineyard, the ridiculousness of Margot's wedding cake, which had been shaped like a wine bottle and toppled halfway through the reception. Wren had missed that, thankfully, but Juliet described it in detail, and he laughed, a low, genuine sound that made her feel accomplished. Here, he said finally, turning down a narrow road that led to a stretch of empty beach. Juliet blinked. We're going to the beach? Is that all right? It's November. You said you liked the ocean. You mentioned it last night. You told the Veil you wished you were listening to waves instead of wedding chaos. Juliet's face went hot. I can't believe you remembered that. I remember everything you said. He parked and came around to open her door, another old-fashioned gesture that made her feel off balance in the best way. Come. I promise you won't be cold. He was right. The beach was empty and windswept, the sand pale under the rising moon, but Wren produced a thick blanket from the trunk and led her to a sheltered spot between two dunes. He spread the blanket, gestured for her to sit, and then settled beside her with a picnic basket she hadn't noticed him carrying. "You brought food," Juliet said, surprised. "I don't eat, but you do." He unpacked the basket with careful precision: bread, cheese, fruit, chocolate, a thermos of hot cider. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I brought options." Juliet's throat felt tight. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to." Wren poured cider into a small cup and handed it to her. "I wanted to give you something better than a coat room and stolen minutes. You deserve this, Juliet. Attention, effort, thought." She sipped the cider, spiced and perfect, and stared out at the ocean. Waves rolled in steady and rhythmic, the sound soothing in a way that made her shoulders finally relax. Beside her, Wren sat quiet and still, content to let her eat and think without pressure. "Why me?" Juliet asked finally. "You could have anyone. Why a seamstress who talks to fabric?" "Because you're kind without expecting reward. Because you see the world in details no one else notices. Because you fixed a veil in 12 minutes and saved a wedding and expected nothing." He turned to look at her, his pale eyes serious. "And because when I'm with you, I don't feel like a king. I feel like a man. That's rare, Juliet. Precious. You barely know me." "Then let me know you better." He shifted closer, his knee brushing hers. "Tell me about your work. Tell me why you became a seamstress." So she did. Juliet told him about her grandmother, who'd taught her to sew before Alzheimer's stole her memories. About the tiny shop she was trying to save, a storefront in Dorchester that barely broke, even but was hers. Entirely hers, the only thing she'd ever built that didn't depend on someone else's approval. About the satisfaction of fixing something broken, making something beautiful, working with her hands in a world that felt increasingly digital and distant. Wren listened like it mattered. He asked questions, thoughtful, specific questions about technique and tools and the challenges of running a small business. He didn't interrupt or offer unsolicited advice. He just listened, and it was so novel that Juliet found herself talking for an hour straight, words spilling out in a rush she couldn't control. "I'm sorry," she said finally, breathless. "I'm talking too much." "You're not." "I am. You're just being polite." "Juliet?" He caught her hand, his fingers cool and firm around hers. "I've spent 300 years listening to people talk at me, petitions, complaints, political maneuvering. You're the first person in decades who's talked to me. There's a difference. And I could listen to you for hours more." She believed him. "Your turn," Juliet said. "Tell me about being a king." Wren's expression shifted, something guarded sliding into place. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How did you become king? Were you born into it?" "No, I was turned in 1673 in London." "I was—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "I was a soldier, a bad one. I got myself killed in a tavern brawl over something incredibly stupid, and my sire, an old vampire named Casimir, thought I had potential. He turned me without asking, which was considered very poor form even then." "Your sire was named Casimir?" Juliet asked. Yes. He's dead now. Has been for 2 centuries. Wren said it without emotion. "I took his name when I killed him. It's tradition the victor claims the name of the vanquished. I was Wren Bellamy when I was human. I became Wren Blackthorne when I took my sire's territory, and I added Casimir when I took his crown." Juliet's stomach dropped. "You killed him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he was cruel. Because he treated humans and fledgling vampires like toys. Because I couldn't stand by and watch anymore." Wren's voice was flat, factual. "I challenged him to single combat and I won. That's how succession works in vampire society. Power through strength. And now you're king." "Now I'm king." He looked at her, waiting for judgment. Juliet considered this. "Do you regret it?" "Killing him? No. Being king." Wren was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. It's lonely. Exhausting. Everyone wants something from me, favors, protection, permission. I haven't had a genuine conversation with another vampire in decades. They're all too busy calculating how to use me." He squeezed her hand. "And then I met you, and you had no idea who I was, and you just existed. Beautifully. It was the most refreshing thing I'd experienced in a century." "I'm not that special," Juliet said quietly. "You are to me." The waves rolled in, steady and endless. Above them, stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light against the darkening sky. Juliet leaned into Wren's side, and he shifted to put his arm around her, tucking her against him despite the cold that radiated from his body. "Doesn't this bother you?" she asked. "That I'm warm and you're not?" "No, I like it. It reminds me of being alive." His hand rubbed slow circles on her shoulder. "Does it bother you?" "No, it's just different." "Different bad or different good?" "Different good," Juliet said, and felt him relax. They stayed on the beach until the moon was high, and Juliet was shivering despite Wren's arm around her. He drove her home in comfortable silence, walked her to her door, and kissed her goodnight with the same careful tenderness he'd shown in the coat room. "Can I see you again?" he asked against her lips. "Yes." "Tomorrow?" "I have work." "After work, then. I'll bring dinner." "You don't eat." "I'll bring you dinner," he corrected, "and I'll keep you company while you do." Juliet smiled. "Okay. Good night, Juliet Porter." "Good night, Wren Blackthorne Casimir." He laughed, surprised and delighted, and kissed her once more before disappearing down the stairs with inhuman speed. Juliet let herself into her apartment, fed buttons, and collapsed into bed with her heart still racing. She was dating a vampire king. This was her life now. She couldn't wait to see him again. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen evenings with Wren. He showed up at her apartment every night after sunset with takeout and conversation, sitting on her worn couch while she ate and told him about her day. He asked about her customers, Mrs. Chen's grandson's bar mitzvah suit, the bride who wanted her mother's wedding dress altered, the theater company that needed costumes for Macbeth. He remembered details, followed up on stories, treated her work like it mattered. In return, he told her about vampire politics, the territorial disputes in the Midwest, the fledgling who'd gone rogue in Miami and had to be brought back under control, the ancient vampire in New Orleans who kept trying to challenge Wren's authority and had to be diplomatically reminded why that was a bad idea. "Do you have to fight a lot?" Juliet asked one evening, curled up beside him while rain battered her windows. "Less now than I used to. Most vampires know better than to challenge me directly." He paused. "Does that bother you? That I'm violent when I need to be?" "I don't know," Juliet said honestly. "I don't like violence, but I understand protecting people you're responsible for. Is that what you're doing?" "Yes. Vampire society would be chaos without structure. Someone has to enforce the rules. And that someone is you. For now." "For now." Wren looked at her, something complicated in his expression. "I've been thinking about stepping down." Juliet sat up straight. "What?" "Not immediately, but eventually." He traced patterns on her knee, his touch absent and thoughtful. "I've been king for 200 years. That's a long time to carry the weight of an entire society. And I'm tired, Juliet. I want something else." "What do you want?" "Peace. Quiet. Time with someone who doesn't see me as a tool or a trophy." His eyes met hers. "Time with you, if you'll have me." Juliet's heart stumbled. "You're talking about the future." "I'm talking about my future, which I hope includes you." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 2 weeks. But I'm 300 years old, Juliet. I know what I want. And I want you." "I'm human," she whispered. "I'll age. I'll die. You'll still be here." "I know. That doesn't bother you." "It terrifies me," Wren said honestly. "But the alternative, not having you at all, terrifies me more." Juliet kissed him. She didn't have words for what she felt, so she poured it into the kiss. Instead, gratitude and fear and want and hope all tangled together. Wren made a low sound and pulled her into his lap, kissing her back with an intensity that stole her breath. His hands fisted in her sweater, and she felt the carefully leashed control he kept over himself, the way he held back even as he kissed her like she was oxygen. "Wren," she gasped. Tell me to stop. I don't want you to stop. Juliet, I want this. I want you. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But I need to know something first. Anything. If we do this, if we keep doing this, what happens? Do I become like you? Do you turn me? Wren went very still. Do you want to be turned? I don't know. I haven't thought about it. She had actually late at night when she couldn't sleep, but she hadn't let herself dwell on it. Is that what you want? I want you to live the life you choose, Wren said carefully. If you want to stay human, I'll spend every day of your natural life at your side and count myself lucky. If you want to be turned someday, not now, when you're ready, I would be honored to be your sire. But it has to be your choice, Juliet, not mine. Never mine. What if I choose wrong? There's no wrong choice, only different futures. He kissed her forehead. And I'll be in whichever one you pick, for as long as you'll have me. Juliet believed him. She wound her arms around his neck and held on, and Wren held her back like she was something precious, and outside, the rain turned to snow, and November became December. They settled into a rhythm. Wren came to her apartment every evening, sometimes with food, sometimes with books or movies he thought she'd like. He met Buttons, who hissed at him for a week before deciding he was acceptable furniture and began sleeping on his lap. He helped Juliet with her work, threading needles and holding fabric taut while she pinned hems, his presence steady and calming. In return, Juliet learned him. She learned he liked old movies and hated modern music, that he read voraciously history and philosophy and occasionally trashy romance novels that made him laugh, that he was fiercely protective of the people under his rule and ruthless with those who threatened them, that he had a dry, cutting sense of humor and a surprising amount of patience for Juliet's anxious rambling. And she learned he was lonely. It came out in small ways, the way he lingered before leaving each night, reluctant to return to his empty castle beneath the city. The way he talked about his court with detachment, like he was describing a job instead of a family. The way he touched her, careful and reverent, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. Do you have friends? Juliet asked one evening in mid-December. They were decorating her tiny Christmas tree, a half-dead pine she'd bought from a street vendor, and Wren was standing on a chair trying to coax the star onto the top. Define friends. People you spend time with because you like them, not because you have to. Wren was quiet for a moment. No. No? Kings don't have friends. We have allies, subordinates, occasionally enemies who are useful enough to keep alive. He climbed down from the chair and studied the tree critically. It's crooked. The tree or the star? Both. Perfect. It matches my life. Juliet plugged in the lights and the tree blazed to life, bright and cheerful and utterly lopsided. There. Festive. It's a disaster. It's charming. It's both. Wren pulled her against him, resting his chin on top of her head. Thank you for this. For what? The tree? For including me, for making space in your life. His arms tightened. For seeing me as more than a king. Juliet turned in his arms to face him. You're Wren. That's all I need you to be. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and the Christmas tree lights cast colored shadows across the walls. The week before Christmas, Margot called. Juliet was at her shop, a tiny storefront wedged between a laundromat and a bodega, when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't answer. She was drowning in holiday orders, surrounded by fabric and half-finished hems, surviving on coffee and stress. But it was Margot, and Margot was family. So Juliet picked up. Jules, oh my God, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. I've been working. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's amazing. David and I just got back from our honeymoon, and I have so much to tell you. Wait, are you busy? Swamped. Oh, well, this will just take a second. I wanted to thank you for fixing my veil. Seriously, you saved my entire wedding. Everyone keeps asking who did my alterations, and I've been giving them your number, so you're welcome for the referrals. Juliet blinked. You've been giving out my number? Of course. You're incredibly talented, Jules. I don't know why you don't advertise more. Because advertising cost money, and Juliet was barely keeping the lights on, but she didn't say that. Thank you. Thank you. Also, Margot continued, I have to know what happened with you and Mr. Blackthorne. Juliet's stomach dropped. What? The investor. The hot, scary one. Claire said she saw you coming out of the coat room with him at the reception, and you looked, she used the word ravished, which is very Claire, but seriously. What happened? Did you hook up with him? I know, we just talked. Jules, you're a terrible liar. We talked, Juliet repeated, face burning. We're seeing each other. Sort of. Margot made a noise like a kettle boiling over. Are you serious? Jules? He's like insanely rich and powerful and terrifying. When did you, oh my God, I need details immediately. There aren't any details. There are always details. Margot, I really have to. Fine, but we're having coffee next week and you're telling me everything. I'm so proud of you, finally putting yourself out there. Margot paused. He's not secretly married, is he? We're in the mob. He's not married. Not anymore, anyway. Wren had told her about his almost betrothal a few nights ago, a political arrangement he'd ended 2 years ago because he couldn't stomach the idea of marrying someone he didn't love. The fallout had been brutal. The other vampire family had considered it an insult, and Wren had spent months smoothing ruffled feathers and reinforcing alliances to prevent an all-out war. And he's not in the mob. Good. Because you deserve someone amazing, Jules. Someone who sees how special you are. Juliet's throat felt tight. Thanks, Margot. Love you. Talk soon. She hung up and Juliet stared at her phone for a long moment, something warm and complicated unfolding in her chest. Margot had given out her number, had called her talented, had said she was proud. Maybe Juliet wasn't as invisible as she'd thought. That evening, Wren showed up at her shop instead of her apartment, carrying Thai food and looking windswept despite the fact that vampires didn't technically get cold. Bad day? Juliet asked, letting him in. Long day? Politics? He set the food down on her work table and pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair. Tell me something good. So she told him about Margot's call, about the referrals, about the tentative hope that maybe her business wouldn't collapse after all. Wren listened with his arms around her, and when she finished, he pulled back to look at her seriously. You need a better space, he said. I can't afford better. I can, Juliet stiffened. Wren, hear me out. Your shop is cramped and poorly lit and in a neighborhood with terrible foot traffic. You're limiting yourself because of budget, not talent. Let me help. I don't want your money. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering investment. He gestured around the small space, his expression thoughtful. You could expand, hire help, actually advertise. You're good, Juliet. You should be thriving, not just surviving. I can't just take your money. Why not? Because it's not, she floundered. People will think I'm using you. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. Wren caught her hands. I've spent 300 years accumulating wealth I don't use. Let me use it for something good, for someone I care about, please. I don't know how to accept help, Juliet admitted quietly. I know, but you're going to learn. He kissed her knuckles. Think about it. No pressure. Just consider the possibility that you deserve more than you're allowing yourself. So she thought about it. She thought about it while she worked late into the night, hunched over her sewing machine in the dim light. She thought about it while she looked at her dwindling bank account and the stack of bills on her counter. She thought about it while she lay in bed with Wren's arm around her, his cool presence a comfort in the dark. Okay, she said finally, a week later. Wren looked up from the book he was reading, something dense and Russian. Okay? I'll let you help, but as a loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back. Juliet. Those are my terms. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, a loan. With 0 interest and no timeline. Reasonable interest, Juliet countered, and a 5-year timeline. You drive a hard bargain. I'm a small business owner. It's in the job description. Wren set aside his book and pulled her into his lap, kissing her until she forgot what they'd been negotiating. Deal, he said against her mouth, but only if you let me take you to dinner to celebrate. I thought you didn't eat. I'll watch you eat. It's one of my favorite activities. That's creepy. It's romantic. It's both, Juliet said, echoing his words from weeks ago, and he laughed and kissed her again. 3 days later, Wren took her to a restaurant so expensive it didn't have prices on the menu. Juliet wore the nicest dress she owned, a dark blue thing she'd made herself, simple and elegant, and still felt underdressed the moment they walked through the door. But Wren kept his hand on the small of her back, steady and reassuring, and the host led them to a private table in the back where the lighting was low and the other diners couldn't stare. "This is too much," Juliet whispered once they were seated. "It's not enough," Wren countered. "Order whatever you want." So she did. She ordered things she couldn't pronounce and let Wren translate the French into English, and when the food arrived, tiny, artful portions that tasted like heaven, she caught him watching her with such open affection that her breath caught. "What?" she asked. "You're beautiful." "I'm eating." "You're beautiful when you eat." Juliet flushed, that familiar heat crawling up her neck. "Stop." "No, you should know how I see you." Wren leaned forward, his pale eyes serious. "You're radiant, Juliet, especially when you're happy. I like making you happy. You're good at it." "Good. I intend to keep practicing." Halfway through dinner, a man approached their table. He was tall and dark-haired, dressed in an expensive suit, and he moved with the liquid grace that marked him as vampire. Juliet tensed, but Wren just sighed. "Lucien," he said flatly. "What do you want?" "My king," Lucien bowed, mockingly formal. "I heard you were in the city. I wanted to pay my respects." "You've paid them. Leave." "Aren't you going to introduce me to your companion?" Lucien's eyes slid to Juliet, assessing and cold. "She's human. She's also none of your concern. Everything that concerns you concerns the court, my king. You know that." Lucien's smile was sharp. "Is this why you've been neglecting your duties? A little human distraction?" Wren was out of his chair so fast Juliet didn't see him move. One moment he was seated, the next he had Lucien by the throat, slammed against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The restaurant went silent. "Let's clarify something," Wren said, his voice deadly soft. "Juliet is not a distraction. She's not a toy. She's under my protection, which means if you insult her again, I will remove your tongue and feed it to you. Are we clear?" Lucien's eyes had gone wide. He nodded as much as he could with Wren's hand around his throat. "Excellent." Wren released him and stepped back, smoothing his jacket. "Now leave and tell the others that my personal life is not court business." Lucien fled. Wren returned to the table like nothing had happened. Around them, the other diners slowly resumed their conversations, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a vampire king threaten one of his subordinates. Juliet's heart was racing. "I'm sorry," Wren said quietly. I shouldn't have lost my temper." "You were protecting me." "I was. But I frightened you." "You didn't frighten me." Juliet reached across the table to take his hand. "I've never had someone defend me like that." It was, she paused, searching for words. "It felt good. Is that wrong?" "No." Wren's fingers tightened around hers. "But I need you to understand something. My world is dangerous, Juliet. There are vampires who would hurt you to hurt me. If we continue this, if we become serious, you'll be a target." "We are serious," Juliet said. "Are we? Aren't we?" Wren's expression softened. "Yes, we are. Which is why I need you to be sure. I can protect you, but I can't eliminate the danger entirely. Not unless—" He stopped. "Unless what?" "Unless you let me turn you." The words hung between them, heavy and inevitable. Juliet had known this conversation was coming, had thought about it late at night, turning the possibility over in her mind like a stone. "Not yet," she said finally. "But maybe someday, if this works, if we work." "We work," Wren said firmly. "You can't know that. I'm 300 years old, I know." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "But I can wait. For you I can wait as long as you need." They finished dinner in comfortable quiet. Wren paid an amount that probably equaled Juliet's monthly rent and drove her home through streets slick with December rain. At her door, he kissed her goodnight with the same careful reverence he always showed, like she was something sacred. "Stay," Juliet said before she could stop herself. Wren went still. "Juliet, I don't mean I'm not asking for—" She took a breath. "I just want you to stay. Sleep here. Well, not sleep, but you know what I mean." "I do know what you mean." His hand cupped her face. Are you sure? Yes. I don't want to rush you. You're not. I'm asking. He searched her face for a long moment, then nodded. All right. They went inside together. Buttons hissed half-heartedly from his perch on the couch, then went back to sleep. Juliet locked the door, suddenly nervous, unsure what happened next. Wren solved the problem by pulling her to the couch and settling her against him, his arm around her shoulders. We don't have to do anything, he said quietly. I know. I'm content just holding you. I know that too. They sat in the dark, listening to rain on the windows and Buttons' rattling purr. Juliet felt safe in a way she'd never felt before, protected and seen and wanted. Eventually, she dozed off, her head on Wren's chest, and when she woke in the morning, he was still there, watching her sleep with something like wonder in his pale eyes. Good morning, he murmured. You stayed. I said I would. Thank you. Always. December became January. The new year arrived with snow and bitter cold, and Juliet's shop stayed busy with post-holiday repairs and alterations. Wren found her a new space, a corner storefront in Cambridge, with huge windows and room to expand, and helped her move despite his protests that manual labor was beneath a king. Juliet ignored him and made him carry boxes anyway. The new shop opened in February. Juliet had dreaded the grand opening, too many people, too much attention, too many opportunities to blush herself into oblivion. But Wren stood at her side the entire time, a steady presence that kept her grounded. Customers came, former clients she'd done work for, dragging their friends, people who'd gotten her number from Margot, strangers who'd seen her sign and wandered in curious. By the end of the day, Juliet had a waiting list 3 weeks long. I told you, Wren said, watching her count orders with something like pride in his expression. You were right. Say that again. I want to remember it. Juliet threw a pincushion at him. March brought the first real test of their relationship. A vampire from the Southern Territories, an ancient named Seraphina, who'd been making trouble for decades, challenged Wren's authority. The challenge was public and formal, and Wren had to respond in kind. He left for New Orleans with a dozen of his strongest vampires, and Juliet didn't hear from him for 3 days. She tried not to panic. He'd warned her this might happen, that his duties as king sometimes took him away. But she couldn't stop imagining worst-case scenarios: Wren hurt, Wren killed, Wren deciding this was all too complicated, and she wasn't worth the trouble. On the 4th day, he came back. Juliet was closing up the shop when he appeared in her doorway, pale and drawn, his suit torn at the shoulder. She dropped the bolt of fabric she'd been holding and ran to him. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're not fine, you're... She touched his shoulder, where fabric had torn away to reveal unmarked white skin beneath. What happened? Seraphina contested my rule. I reminded her why that was a poor decision. Wren's voice was flat, exhausted. She's dead. The Southern Covens have been folded back into line. It's done. You killed her. Yes. Juliet studied his face. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, worn down by violence and politics and the weight of a crown he'd never wanted. Come upstairs, she said quietly. Juliet, Come upstairs, please. He followed her to the apartment above the shop, a space she'd started renting when she moved the business, larger than her old place and bright with afternoon sun. Juliet made him sit on the couch, brought him a glass of water he didn't drink, and settled beside him. Talk to me, she said. There's nothing to talk about. You just killed someone. I've killed many people, Juliet. It's part of what I do. Does it bother you? Sometimes. He leaned back against the couch, eyes closed. Seraphina was cruel. She tortured humans and fledglings alike. The world is better without her, but I still... He stopped. I'm tired of being the executioner. I'm tired of playing king. Then stop. It's not that simple. Why not? Wren opened his eyes to look at her. Because vampire society needs structure. Without a strong king, there's chaos, civil war. Humans get caught in the crossfire. So find someone else to be king. Train a successor. Who? Most vampires don't want the responsibility, and those who do want it for the wrong reasons, power, glory, control. I can't hand the throne to someone who will abuse it. Then what do you want? I want to be with you, Wren said quietly. I want to wake up beside you every evening and fall asleep at dawn knowing you're safe. I want to help you build your business and watch you thrive. I want—" His voice cracked slightly. "I want a life that isn't defined by violence and politics. I want peace, Juliet. With you." Juliet's heart cracked open. She climbed into his lap, wrapped her arms around him, and held on while he buried his face in her neck and just breathed. "Then we'll figure it out," she said. "Together, okay?" "Okay." They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together on the couch while evening faded to night outside. Eventually, Wren stirred, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you," he said. Juliet pulled back to look at him. "What?" "I love you. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was afraid of I don't know, scaring you, moving too fast, being too much." He cupped her face in both hands. "But I do love you, Juliet Porter. More than I've loved anyone in 300 years, and I need you to know that." "I love you too," Juliet whispered and kissed him. It was different this time, less careful, more desperate. Wren made a rough sound and pulled her closer, his hands fisting in her shirt. Juliet kissed him back with everything she had, pouring months of feeling into it, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Stay tonight," Juliet said. "Really stay, not just sitting on the couch. Juliet, I want you, all of you, please." Wren searched her face, his expression torn between want and caution. Then he nodded. "All right." He carried her to bed. Spring arrived with crocuses and longer days. Juliet's shop flourished. Wren began the delicate process of identifying a successor, interviewing vampires who might be capable of ruling without cruelty. They moved slowly, carefully, feeling out each other's futures. And then, one evening in April, Wren came to her with a question. "There's a formal court event next month," he said, sprawled on her couch with buttons asleep on his chest. "A gathering of all the North American covens. It's important. Political. Okay? I'd like you to come with me." Juliet looked up from the hem she was pinning. "To a vampire court?" "Yes." "As what, your guest?" "As my partner." Wren sat up carefully, depositing buttons onto the cushion beside him. "I want to introduce you formally. Let the court know you're under my protection. Make it clear that we're serious," Juliet finished. "Yes," she set down her pins. "That's a big step." "I know. People will talk. Let them. Your court might not like that you're with a human. Then they can challenge me." Wren's eyes were steady. "And lose." Juliet thought about it. The idea of walking into a room full of vampires terrified her, but the idea of hiding, of being Wren's secret, that felt worse. She'd spent her whole life invisible. She didn't want to be invisible to him too. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll go, but you have to promise me something. Anything. If I start blushing so hard I look like a tomato, you have to dance with me in the coat room again." Wren crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, laughing. "Deal." The court gathering was held in a restored theater in downtown Boston, a gorgeous old building with velvet seats and gilded balconies. Juliet wore a dress she'd made specifically for the occasion, midnight blue silk, that made her feel elegant and confident, and only slightly terrified. Wren wore all black and formal and intimidating, and kept her hand in his the entire night. The vampires stared. Of course they stared. Juliet was the only human in a room full of immortals, and she was on the arm of their king. But Wren ignored the whispers and introduced her to everyone who mattered: his lieutenants, his advisors, the heads of the major covens. He presented her not as a curiosity but as his equal, and slowly, grudgingly, the court began to accept her. Halfway through the evening, the band started playing. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, vampires moving with inhuman grace, their pale skin glowing under the chandeliers. Wren leaned down to murmur in her ear, "Dance with me? Here, in front of everyone?" "Here," he confirmed. "I want them to see you. I want them to know you're mine." Juliet's face went hot. She could feel the blush crawling up her neck, painting her cheeks scarlet. "Wren, trust me," he said, and led her onto the floor. The music was slow and old-fashioned, something that might have been played when Wren was human. He pulled her close and began to lead, and Juliet followed, her heart racing. Around them, other vampires watched with varying degrees of curiosity and disapproval, but Wren's focus never wavered from her face. "You're beautiful when you blush," he said quietly. "I look ridiculous." "You look alive, radiant, human." He spun her gently. "You look like everything I've been searching for and didn't know I needed." "You're being dramatic." "I'm being honest." Wren pulled her closer. "Thank you for coming tonight, for being brave, for letting me show you off." "I'm not brave," Juliet said. "I'm terrified." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And you're here, dancing in front of 100 vampires who are all wondering why their king chose a human seamstress from Dorchester. You're the bravest person I know." Juliet's eyes stung. "I love you. I love you too." They danced through 3 songs, and by the third one, Juliet had forgotten to be embarrassed. She was too focused on Wren, the way he held her, the way he looked at her, the way he moved like they'd been dancing together for centuries instead of months. When the music ended, he didn't let go. "There's something I need to tell you," Wren said. "Okay? I found a successor." Juliet's breath caught. "You did?" "Her name is Elena. She's been my lieutenant for 50 years. She's smart, fair, ruthless when she needs to be, and compassionate when she can afford it. The court respects her. She'll be a good queen." He paused. "I'm stepping down at the end of the summer." "Wren, I've already begun the transition. Elena knows. The court will be informed officially next month. By September, I'll no longer be king." "What will you do?" "Whatever I want." He smiled, tentative and hopeful. "Travel, maybe. Read all the books I never had time for. Help you run your shop, if you'll let me." "You want to help run a seamstress shop?" "I want to be wherever you are." Juliet kissed him, there on the dance floor in front of the entire vampire court. "Let them see. Let them know." "Yes," she said against his mouth. "Yes to all of it." Summer passed in a blur of transition and change. Wren spent his days training Elena, slowly handing over the reins of power. Juliet expanded her shop again, hiring 2 seamstresses to help with the workload. They moved into a house together in late August, a small Victorian in Somerville with a garden and a porch and room for buttons to roam. On the 1st of September, Wren formally abdicated. The ceremony was small and private, just Elena and the inner court. And when it was done, Wren came home to Juliet with a lightness in his step she'd never seen before. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Strange. Liberating." He pulled her into his arms. "Good. What do you want to do now?" "This." He kissed her. "And this." Another kiss. "And possibly take you to bed and not leave for a week." Juliet laughed. "I have a business to run." "So do I. You hired me, remember? Assistant to the seamstress extraordinaire." "I did not hire you." "You should. I'm very good at threading needles." "You're terrible at threading needles." "I'm adequate at threading needles and excellent at making you smile." "That should count for something." She kissed him again, long and sweet, and thought about the future stretching ahead of them. Years, maybe. Decades, if she stayed human. Or longer centuries, even if she chose to turn. "I've been thinking," Juliet said. "About?" "About what you offered, back in January." Wren went very still. "Turning?" "Yeah." She pulled back to look at him. "I'm not ready yet. I want to live first really live as a human, build my business, travel with you, see the world through mortal eyes." She took a breath. "But someday, maybe in 10 years, maybe 20, I think I'd like to try eternity. With you." "You're sure?" "I'm sure I love you. I'm sure I want a future with you, whatever shape that takes." Juliet cupped his face in her hands. "You told me once that I deserved to choose my own life. This is me choosing. Not now, but someday. Okay?" "Okay," Wren said, and she heard the relief in his voice. "Someday." They stood in the kitchen of their new house, holding each other while the sun set outside and the world turned toward night. Somewhere in the city, Elena was stepping into her new role as queen. Somewhere else, vampires were feeding and humans were living, and the dance between the two continued as it always had. But here, in this moment, Juliet and Wren were just themselves, a seamstress and a former king, building a life together one day at a time. And that was enough. 5 years later, Juliet's shop had become one of the most sought-after alteration studios in Boston. She employed 6 seamstresses, had a waiting list that stretched months, and had been featured in 3 local magazines. Wren worked alongside her most days, managing the books and handling difficult customers with the same ruthless efficiency he'd once applied to vampire politics. They'd traveled extensively Europe, Asia, South America, always at night, always together. Wren showed her cities he'd lived in centuries ago, told her stories about the world before she was born. Juliet showed him how to use a smartphone and convinced him to try Thai food and made him watch every Marvel movie in chronological order. They were happy. And then, one evening in October, Juliet came home to find Wren setting up something in the backyard. "What are you doing?" she asked, stepping outside. "You'll see." He'd strung lights through the trees, hung lanterns from the porch, and set up a small speaker that was playing something soft and instrumental. In the center of the yard, he'd cleared a space and laid down a carpet. "Wren?" He turned to face her, holding out one hand. "Dance with me? Here? Why not? We have a whole house." "I wanted stars." He gestured up at the sky, clear and bright with constellations. "We've danced in coat rooms and ballrooms and theaters, but never under the sky. Dance with me, Juliet Porter." She took his hand. They danced in the backyard, just the two of them, moving to music that drifted through the October air. Wren held her close and led her in gentle circles, and Juliet let herself melt into him, safe and seen and loved. "I have something to ask you," Wren said after a while. "Okay?" He stopped dancing. Then, to her complete shock, he got down on one knee. "What are you doing?" Juliet breathed. "Something I should have done months ago." Wren pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a ring simple silver with a single sapphire. "Juliet Porter, you are the most extraordinary person I've ever met. You're kind and talented and brave in ways you don't even realize. You see people really see them and you make them feel valued. You made me feel human again when I'd forgotten what that meant." His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. "I love you more than I have words for. Will you marry me?" Juliet's vision blurred with tears. "Yes." "Yes?" "Yes, you impossible dramatic vampire. Yes." Wren surged to his feet and kissed her, spinning her in a circle while she laughed and cried and clung to him. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything else about them. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at the vineyard where they'd met. Margot was there, and Aunt Helen, and all of Juliet's staff from the shop. Elena came with a delegation from the vampire court, and to Juliet's surprise, the vampires and humans mingled without incident. Wren stood at the altar in a black suit, looking nervous for the first time in 300 years. And when Juliet walked down the aisle in a dress she'd made herself white silk with delicate embroidery, his face transformed with such open joy that half the guests started crying. They said their vows under the sunset early evening so Wren wouldn't burn, late enough that the sky was painted gold. Juliet promised to love him through eternity, however long that might be. Wren promised to protect her, cherish her, and dance with her whenever she blushed too deep to bear. At the reception, they danced their first dance in the open air, surrounded by friends and family and the people who'd witnessed their strange, beautiful love story unfold. Afterward, when someone asked Juliet how she'd ended up married to a vampire king, she just smiled. "He danced with me in a coat room," she said, and everything else followed. 10 years later, Juliet was 37 and starting to feel the weight of mortality. She tired more easily. Her hands ached on cold mornings. She found silver in her hair and lines at the corners of her eyes. And one evening, curled up on the couch with Wren reading beside her, she said, "I'm ready." He looked up from his book. "Ready for what?" "To turn, to become like you." She sat up to face him properly. "I've lived the life I wanted as a human. I've built my business, traveled, loved you for a decade as a mortal, but I'm not done, Wren. I don't want to grow old and leave you. I want centuries with you, millennia if we can have them." "Are you absolutely certain?" "Yes. There's no going back." "I know. You'll outlive everyone you know who stays human." "I know that too." Juliet took his hands. "But I'll have you. That's enough." Wren kissed her forehead. "When?" "Soon. Maybe next month, after the spring orders are finished." "Next month," he agreed. "I'll make the arrangements." The turning happened on a cool May evening. Elena was there to witness, as were two other ancient vampires who served as officiants. Wren explained everything carefully, the pain, the transformation, the 3 days of death and rebirth she'd have to endure. Juliet listened and didn't waver. "I love you," she told him. "I love you too." He bit her gently, carefully, draining her to the edge of death. Then he fed her his blood, cold and strange and burning, and held her while the transformation began. It hurt. God, it hurt, like being torn apart and remade, every cell in her body screaming. Juliet convulsed in Wren's arms, and he held her through it, murmuring reassurances, promising it would end. And it did. 3 days later, Juliet woke with ice in her veins and hunger in her throat, and Wren's face the first thing she saw. "Hello," he said softly. "Hi." Her voice was different, clearer, sharper. Everything was sharper. She could hear Wren's coat rustling, smell old blood in his veins, see dust motes floating in the air like tiny galaxies. Is it done?" "It's done. You're vampire now." He cupped her face. "How do you feel? Hungry? Overwhelmed? Alive in a weird way?" She sat up slowly, testing her new body. Stronger, faster, cold. It worked. It did. Wren pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Welcome to eternity, Juliet." She turned vampire with grace, learned to hunt ethically, to manage the bloodlust, to move through the world without drawing human attention. Her business continued to thrive. She worked nights now, which actually helped with the evening wear customers. Wren stayed at her side, teaching her, guiding her, loving her through every step. And 50 years after their wedding, when Juliet's great-niece got married at the same vineyard where she and Wren had met, they danced at the reception, like they had that first night, slowly, carefully, holding each other close while the world spun around them. "Do you regret it?" Wren asked quietly, turning. "Never." Juliet looked up at him, her husband, her sire, her partner in eternity. "This is exactly the life I wanted." "Good," he said, and kissed her. They danced until the reception ended, until the last guest left, until they were alone under the stars. And then they went home to the life they'd built together, a seamstress and a former king, forever intertwined, forever dancing. 130 years later, Juliet stood in her shop, expanded again, now taking up an entire building in downtown Boston, and watched her staff work. Some were human, some were vampire, all were talented. The business had become legendary, passed down through generations of seamstresses who trained under Juliet's watchful eye. Wren came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They both looked exactly as they had the night she turned unaged, unchanging, frozen in their 30s forever. "Thinking," he murmured. "Remembering," Juliet said. "That wedding, the coat room, how terrified I was. And now I'm grateful," she turned in his arms, "for all of it. The fear, the blushing, the invisibility that led me to you. I'm the one who's grateful. We can both be grateful. Deal." They stood together in the quiet shop, surrounded by fabric and thread and the work Juliet loved. Outside, the city moved through another evening. Inside, two vampires held each other and remembered what it was like to be human, to be nervous, to dance in a coat room where no one could see them blush. And in the back office, tucked into a frame on the wall, was a photograph from that vineyard wedding over a century ago, a young woman in a dove-gray dress standing beside a pale man in black, both of them smiling like they'd just discovered something precious. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Where It All Began." Juliet and Wren looked at it sometimes when they needed the reminder that love could start in the smallest moments, a torn veil, a quiet conversation, a dance offered in kindness. That being seen was a gift, and seeing others was a responsibility. That forever was long, but never long enough when you spent it with the right person. They'd had their forever, their centuries of dancing, working, living, loving. They'd weathered political upheaval and social change and the slow march of history. They'd watched humans land on the moon and invent the internet and cure diseases Wren remembered killing thousands. And through it all, they'd had each other. "What should we do tonight?" Wren asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Dance?" Juliet suggested. "Always?" So they did. Right there in the shop, with no music and no audience, they danced like they had that very first night, slowly, carefully, holding each other close while the world turned around them. Two people who'd found each other in a coat room, who'd chosen love over fear, visibility over invisibility, eternity together over anything apart. And somewhere in the distance, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of a wedding band playing and guests laughing and a nervous seamstress whispering to silk that maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out perfectly after all. It had. It always would. Because love, Juliet had learned, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up, being present, dancing in coat rooms when someone needed privacy, seeing the invisible people and making them feel valued, choosing partnership over power, tenderness over tradition, forever with someone who made you feel seen. She'd found that with Wren, and he'd found it with her, and that, more than anything, was worth dancing for. One evening in late autumn, nearly 2 centuries after their first dance, Juliet and Wren returned to the vineyard. It was under different ownership. Now Elena had sold it decades ago when she'd stepped down as queen herself, but the new owners recognized Wren and Juliet from the legends and let them wander the grounds after hours. They walked through the gardens where Margot had gotten married, past the restored barn where the reception had been held, all the way to the small building at the back where the coat room had been. It was a storage space now, filled with equipment and supplies. But when Juliet closed her eyes, she could still see it, as it had been dim and cluttered, smelling of wool and wine, with a nervous seamstress and a lonely king finding each other in the dark. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Wren asked quietly. "Which part?" "When I told you I was a vampire, you asked why I was telling you." Juliet smiled. "You said I deserved honesty. I meant it. You deserved the truth then, and you deserve it now." He pulled her close. "You saved me that night, Juliet. Not just from a boring wedding reception, from loneliness, from believing I'd spend eternity alone. You saved me too," Juliet said, "from invisibility, from thinking I wasn't worth seeing." They stood together in the doorway of what had once been a coat room, holding each other while memories swirled around them like ghosts. The young woman who'd muttered to fabric, the ancient king who'd offered her a dance, the love that had grown between them, slow and steady and stronger than either had expected. "Want to dance?" Wren asked. "Here? Why not, for old time's sake?" So they danced one more time in the space where it had all begun, moving to music only they could hear, two vampires who'd once been human and nervous and desperate for connection. And if their movements were more fluid now, more graceful after centuries of practice, if they no longer needed to count steps or worry about stumbling, the emotion was the same. The love, the tenderness, the gratitude for finding each other against all odds. "Thank you," Juliet whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for dancing with me, for all of it." "Thank you for letting me," Wren said, and kissed her there in the doorway, in the space where their forever had begun. They left the vineyard hand in hand as dawn approached, heading home to the life they'd built together. And behind them, if you looked closely, you could almost see the ghosts of who they'd been, a nervous bridesmaid and a lonely king, slow dancing in a coat room where no one could see her blush so deep. But she didn't need to hide anymore. Neither of them did. They'd found each other. They'd chosen each other, and they'd spend eternity grateful for the night when a torn veil and a quiet moment had led them to exactly where they belonged, together, forever, dancing. Years later, so many years, the number stopped mattering. Juliet would tell their story to the young vampires who came seeking wisdom. She'd talk about the importance of seeing the invisible, of offering kindness without expectation, of dancing with people who needed shelter from the spotlight. And she'd always end the same way. Love finds you in the strangest places, coat rooms, quiet moments, the spaces between heartbeats. Be ready for it, be open to it, and when it comes, dance. The young vampires would listen, wide-eyed and hopeful. And Wren would stand beside her, his hand in hers, living proof that forever was real and love was possible. And sometimes the best stories started with a nervous seamstress and a torn veil and a vampire king who knew exactly when to offer a dance. Their legacy wasn't power or wealth or political achievement. It was simpler than that, and more profound. They'd loved each other well. They'd built a life of kindness and creativity and partnership. They'd shown that different worlds could meet vampire and human, king and seamstress, ancient and young, and find common ground in tenderness. And whenever someone asked Wren how he'd known Juliet was the one, he'd smile that rare, genuine smile that only she could coax out of him and say, "She blushed when I saw her, really saw her, and I realized I wanted to spend eternity making her feel safe enough to blush without hiding." "And do you?" they'd ask. "Every day," Wren would say, pulling Juliet close, "every single day." And Juliet, who no longer blushed because vampire physiology didn't allow it, would laugh and kiss him and be grateful that some things, love, partnership, the memory of dancing in coat rooms, transcended even immortality. They'd found their forever in a moment of kindness, and they'd honored it every day since, dancing through the centuries hand in hand, two souls who'd saved each other without even realizing they'd both needed saving. That was their story. That was their truth. And it was, in every sense that mattered, perfect. Many decades after that, long after the vineyard had been torn down and rebuilt and torn down again, long after Boston had transformed beyond recognition, long after everyone who'd attended that wedding had passed into memory, Juliet and Wren still remained. They'd moved their home multiple times, adapted to new eras, learned new technologies. But the core of who they were, who they'd been when they first met, never changed. Juliet still sewed, though now she taught master classes and had written books on the art of alteration. Wren still supported her, though now he ran a nonprofit helping struggling artists and makers get their businesses off the ground. And they still danced. In their living room, in empty streets at midnight, in parks where no one could see them move with inhuman grace. They danced because it was theirs, their first connection, their private language, their way of saying, "I see you," without words. One particularly cold evening, Juliet was in her studio, a beautiful space at the top of their brownstone, working on a commission, when Wren came in carrying 2 mugs. "I made you blood," he said. "The good kind, from that donor you like. You're the best husband in the history of husbands." "I know." He handed her the mug and settled into the chair beside her work table. "What are you making?" "A wedding dress. The bride is a vampire, she's marrying a human. They want something that honors both their worlds." "Like us." "Like us," Juliet agreed, smiling. She sipped her blood warm and rich, exactly as she liked it, and studied the fabric in front of her. White silk with silver thread, traditional but with modern lines. Beautiful. "Do you ever miss it?" Wren asked quietly. "Being human?" Juliet thought about it. Really thought. "Sometimes I miss the sun, the way food tasted. My grandmother's voice, I can't quite remember it anymore, even with vampire memory." She set down her mug and took his hand. "But no, I don't regret turning. I got centuries with you. That's worth more than anything I gave up. I want you to be happy." "I am happy. Wren, I'm so happy." She squeezed his fingers. "Are you?" "Happy, I mean." "Deliriously," he said, and meant it. "You gave me a life beyond being king, a purpose beyond ruling. You gave me—" He paused, searching for words. "You gave me joy, Juliet. Every single day you give me joy." She climbed into his lap, careful not to knock over her blood, and kissed him thoroughly. "Good. Because you're stuck with me forever now." "Best fate I could imagine." They sat together in the quiet studio, surrounded by fabric and thread and the work that had brought them together so long ago. Outside, the city moved through another evening. Inside, 2 vampires held each other and counted themselves blessed, because they had found what so many searched for and never discovered, a love that transcended circumstance, a partnership built on mutual respect and tenderness, a forever that felt exactly right. And it had all started in a coat room, with a nervous seamstress and a lonely king, and a slow dance that changed everything. Sometimes, late at night when they couldn't sleep, not that vampires needed sleep, but old habits died hard, Juliet and Wren would talk about having children. It was possible, with magic and the right rituals. Vampire-human hybrids were rare, but not unheard of. "Would you want that?" Juliet asked one evening, curled against Wren's side in their bed. "Children?" "Yeah." Wren was quiet for a long moment. I think so. If you did. If you wanted to try. I'm terrified of being a bad mother. You wouldn't be. How do you know? Because you're kind, patient. You see people really see them. Those are the most important qualities in a parent. He pressed a kiss to her hair. But it's a big decision. We don't have to make it now. We have time, Juliet agreed. They had all the time in the world. 3 years later, through a combination of ancient magic and modern medicine and sheer determination, Juliet became pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult. Vampire bodies weren't designed for it. But she endured with Wren at her side, holding her through the pain and celebrating each small milestone. Their daughter was born on a snowy evening in December, exactly 215 years after Juliet and Wren had first danced in a coat room. They named her Aleska after an old word for joy. She was perfect half vampire, half human, with Juliet's dark hair and Wren's pale eyes. She grew slowly, aging at about half the rate of human children, and she was smart and creative and so full of life that sometimes Juliet cried watching her play. "We made this," she whispered to Wren one evening, watching Aleska draw at the kitchen table. "We made her." "We did." Wren's arm came around her waist. "She's extraordinary. She gets that from you. She gets it from both of us." Aleska grew up surrounded by love and fabric and stories about the night her parents met. She learned to sew from Juliet, learned vampire politics from Wren, learned to navigate both worlds with grace and confidence. And when she was old enough to understand, they told her everything, how they'd met, how they'd fallen in love, how they'd chosen forever together. "That's so romantic," Aleska sighed, 16 years old and dreamy-eyed. "It was mostly awkward," Juliet said. "But yes, romantic," Wren added, laughing at Juliet's expression. "Will I find someone like that?" Aleska asked. "I hope so," Juliet said. "But don't settle. Wait for someone who sees you, really sees you, someone who makes you feel safe enough to be yourself. Like Dad sees you. Exactly like that." Years later, Aleska would find her own love story different from her parents', but no less beautiful. And Juliet and Wren would dance at her wedding with the same tenderness they'd shown at their own. And afterward, alone in the coat room where guests had left their jackets, they'd slow dance one more time, remembering the night that had started everything. "Think we'd do it again?" Juliet asked. "If we could go back, knowing everything we know now?" "In a heartbeat," Wren said without hesitation. "Every single moment, every choice, all of it." "Even the scary parts?" "Especially the scary parts. They led me to you." Juliet rested her head against his chest, listening to the silence where a heartbeat used to be, and smiled. "Me too. I'd do it all again." "Good," Wren said, and kissed her as the music played beyond the door, and their daughter laughed somewhere in the distance, and the future stretched ahead of them, bright and endless and theirs. They danced in coat rooms and ballrooms and kitchens and streets. They danced through centuries and challenges and changes. They'd dance through mortal life and vampire transformation and parenthood and every joy and sorrow in between. And they'd keep dancing forever, together. Because that's what love was, choosing to dance even when you were scared, even when people were watching, even when you didn't know the steps. Finding someone who'd lead you through the fear into joy, who'd see you when you felt invisible, who'd hold you steady when the world spun too fast. Juliet had found that in Wren. Wren had found it in Juliet, and together they'd built a love story that transcended time itself. It had started in a coat room with a nervous seamstress who blushed too easily and a vampire king who needed to remember how to be gentle. And it would never end. Because some loves, the truest ones, last forever. Through every dance, every moment, every heartbeat or lack thereof, through everything they endure. And Juliet and Wren's love? It was exactly that kind of forever, the kind worth dancing for, the kind worth living and dying and living again for, the kind that started in stolen moments and grew into eternity, one slow dance at a time.